Good evening. I want to thank our live audience, folks that came out tonight. And I want to thank those who are watching online for the first part of our three-part series, parent workshops here in Sachem schools. Tonight we have Meryl Cassidy from the Response Crisis Center. She's going to be talking with us about life skills for coping with stress, what parents need to know. Thank you so much for coming out. We have such concern for our youngsters, our students, our children, even our staff, ourselves, adults. COVID has impacted people in so many different ways. So that stress level, I know, is really through the roof. I want to thank you for coming out tonight, providing some resources. This will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel. We welcome people. We'll shoot out a link to our community for people to follow and see all it is that you have to offer. So again, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm Chris Pelletier, the superintendent.
That's a good idea. Good idea.
Remember that next time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Meryl Cassidy. I'm the Executive Director at Response Crisis Center, and really happy to be with you tonight. I have a lot of information to share, resources to share, and I'm also very open to taking questions. Hoping we have time for questions at the end, but you can also just get my attention if you want to stop me and you want to talk about anything that I'm presenting. That would be fine. So you can see that what our title is, and it's an interesting visual, right? The roller coaster, very familiar metaphor for life. Basically meaning life has its ups and downs. And we often kind of brace ourselves, for the inevitable falls by white knuckling through it, when you're holding onto a roller coaster. We also often learn coping skills along the way so that the lows aren't quite as devastating. But if you really think about it, the metaphor of a roller coaster isn't quite apt. Life is much more difficult than a roller coaster. If it were like a roller coaster, really, you would be able to see exactly where you were about to go, right? How long it would take, the speed at which you would need to travel each bit, and who you were going to live it with. You could brace yourself, seeing the ups and downs, the loops, the big scary drops before you'd have to experience them. And you would be pretty sure that you would be able to stay on track the whole way and wind back to the start in a controlled and complete manner. But life's not like that, right? The uncertainty of life, especially given what we've all experienced over the past 24 months, can be very challenging, especially for our kids. So in this presentation, we're going to be really exploring what the research and also what our own human experiences tell us about coping with and through life's challenges, and how we as parents, can best support our kids. And, full disclosure, I'm not only a social worker, I am also a parent. So I have some street cred when it comes to this subject. So who are we at Response? We are your local crisis intervention and suicide prevention center. We have been in your community for 51 years. We were founded in 1971 with the mission of being there for people in crisis 24/7, 365 days a year, providing counseling, support, information, and referrals, with the goal of really preventing behaviors that can lead to self-injury or suicide. Our counselors offer empathy, compassion, confidentiality every hour of the day, every day of the year, which is really so helpful to people who are struggling. And these services are free, and they're available to all of you. And how do we do this? We do this through phone, chat, and text. We have our local crisis hotline, 24/7, 751-7500. We are also the area provider for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So when you call 1-800-273-8255 from a 631, it gets routed to our center. We also back up Nassau County, and we cover 5 other counties in New York State. And we also this month became a backup center for the National Lifeline. So we take calls from all over the country. On the chat and text side, we're a backup center for the Lifeline as well. So every morning from 4 a.m. to noon, we're taking chats and texts from all over the country. And it wouldn't surprise you to know that most of the people who come on to chat and text are kids and teens and young adults, but really people of all ages as well. We also have a lot of partnerships. You can see the Long Island Railroad, we have a partnership with them. You might see the poster on some of the platforms that directs you to our center. We have a lot of agencies, community partners, where they refer folks to us, and we do structured telephone follow-up with people in the community that they refer to us. We back up Vibes' domestic violence hotline. We have lots of partnerships. And we do a lot of community education. There are 72 school districts in Suffolk County. We're in just about all of them. But we also do a lot of professional training. Also research. So there's a project that I lead called the Suicide Fatality Review Team in Suffolk County. So we work with the medical examiner's office to review cases to try to figure out what led up to this tragic event. And more importantly, can we identify systemic changes that, if we could put in place, could prevent? So it's really, there's a prevention focus. It's easy to reach out and get help. It's 24/7. The whole idea of a crisis hotline is immediate help in the moment when you need it, right? Because crises don't happen between 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? And the idea is when somebody's experiencing that level of emotional distress, they need that immediate, warm human connection right there in the moment to de-escalate it. And why do people reach out? I mean, some of the most common reasons are things like relationship issues, loss, illness, depression, anxiety. Sometimes I'm having thoughts of suicide is the reason why. Sometimes people reach out because they're worried about another person. We call those third-party calls. So lots of different reasons why people reach out. You can see that reflected here with our person who's thinking about calling. And again, we human beings are complex. And so when there are things bubbling up in our lives that are causing us distress, they can have a cumulative effect. And we need support. So that's why we exist. One thing I've learned during not only these past 2 years of COVID, but over my entire career and my life on this planet, is that everyone on this planet struggles with mental health issues or loves someone who does. That means that mental health and wellness is about and for everyone on the planet. And yet, we don't really provide a lot of safe spaces to talk about our mental health issues. We talk about maybe the score at last night's game, or the latest show we're binging on Netflix, or maybe our favorite new exercise or diet program. I believe we need to be talking openly and honestly about mental health as commonly and as safely as we talk about all of these other subjects. So I'm on a mission to do that. And we must make it as safe for our kids to do that, to talk about their mental health and their mental health struggles. At Response, again, through our phone, chat, and text, and community education and training, we know that so many out there are struggling to find connection, to find meaning, acceptance. And our mission is to provide people in crisis with this level of unconditional acceptance and compassion and respect in order to lower anxiety and facilitate a process where they can figure out their own next best steps and where their own coping skills can emerge. And I think that's similar to the work we have to do as parents. We don't want to, and I'll talk more about this in the presentation, but we don't want to just jump in and tell kids what to do. we want to have them take responsibility. So we'll talk a little bit more about that because, it's so easy to get into power struggles with our kids, especially our teenage kids. And so our vision for the world is much more aspirational. And I'll throw this out to you as a vision that if you could help me create a world, I don't know how to do this, but I think if you can visualize it, you can make it so. If we could visualize a world where people feel connected and cared for and secure in knowing that they matter and that their lives are worth living, I think we would be on to something, because I think there would be many, well, I would probably be working myself out of a job because there would be much fewer deaths of despair and people in despair, because people would feel connected and cared for and like their lives matter. And so lots of people reach out to crisis hotlines. Lots of kids do. It's a safe place. People are looking for that non-judgmental, safe space. A lot of people say that they don't want to burden the people in their life. You think, why would somebody reach out to a crisis hotline, talk to a stranger versus a close family member or friend? And, lots of different reasons. I don't want to burden my parents. They have enough on their plate. Or I don't want to burden my best friend. Or they'll freak out, or they won't believe me, or they'll dismiss what I'm going through. Lots of different reasons. So this is just a reminder that we've all been through a lot these past 2 years. Really, it's okay to acknowledge that. We've all been through collective trauma. And the definition of collective trauma is, a threatening event gives rise to a shared identification, despite the fact that the victimized individuals, that's all of us, have different personalities and family backgrounds, different coping mechanisms and capacities for resilience. We've all been through this collective trauma, this shared experience characterized by some level of helplessness, disorientation, and loss. So it's okay to acknowledge that. We're still figuring it out. I know COVID is hopefully in the rear view, but we've been through a lot, and it's okay to acknowledge that, right? So be gentle with yourself and the people around you, which is really what trauma-informed care is all about. So let's just talk for a few minutes about what we mean when we talk about a crisis. And I'm sure, if I asked you to recall a time in your life when you felt like you were, experiencing some sort of a crisis, certain things might come to mind. Anybody want to throw out what you might think of when you hear the word crisis? What are people feeling when they're in a crisis? Just shout it out. Shout it out.
Terrified.
What's that?
Terrified.
Terrified, right? There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of anxiety. Absolutely. In fact, that is the predominant feeling, right? When you're in a crisis. Any other things come to mind about what comes to mind when you think of a crisis? What?
Anxiety.
Okay, yeah, fear, anxiety. Some people experience feelings of extreme isolation, feeling like the choices that are available to you none of them are any good. And so you feel trapped, maybe. The basis of crisis theory is this belief that people that are experiencing any level of crisis have within themselves the ability to grow, to change, and to make appropriate choices, and to choose the best course of action for themselves. But the thing that blocks these choices is anxiety, right? When you are flooded with anxiety, you can't make good choices, right? Your decision-making abilities, aren't working. People may say to you, I just can't think, and it's really true, right? Think of a computer, our IT friend back there, he's shaking his head, right? Think of a computer going offline, crashing. That's kind of what's happening in your brain, right? The prefrontal cortex gets flooded and goes offline, and you start thinking with the basement of the brain, the amygdala. Now I get to sound like a neuroscientist. I get to sound very smart, but that's, sort of the feeling center of the brain. And so crisis counseling is all about meeting people where they're at in that moment and not insisting on problem solving. Not when someone's in crisis. When someone's in crisis, you need to take the time to connect with them on a feeling level. Let them express their feelings, reflect their feelings, validate their feelings, and then once you're able to de-escalate that anxiety, then the computer, the executive function can go back online and the person can start accessing their own coping skills and processing and problem solving better. So the way this can manifest with your kids is something happened it can manifest in a lot of different ways, but they might zone out, or they might just really not be able to think. And so spending some time with them, helping them release some of the feelings, whether it's taking the dog for a walk or going and jumping on the trampoline, or, or maybe your kid is old enough where you can sit down and talk to them for a while and let them express their feelings, right? Before you can really get into problem solving mode. It's important to remember that a crisis is more a state of mind than an event. It's really more about the meaning that we give to the events in our lives. And a crisis for one person might be a mild annoyance for another. I'm very close with a nephew of mine. He called me at work yesterday, and he was in a crisis. And the crisis was, and why he called me, I have no idea, but he called me and I was grateful I was there to pick up the phone. And I could hear he was in a crisis. He was crying, he was breathing heavy. And what was the crisis? He locked his car keys in the car. So I said, okay, JP, take a deep breath with me. Let's breathe. All right, where are you? Tell me where you are. Grounding technique, right? Is there like a car place nearby? Those guys have the tools. You can get it. They can help you get into your car. If you need somebody to pay for it, I'll put it on my credit card. This is not a crisis. I didn't say this is not a crisis, but walked him through it. He's like, you're a genius. There's a Goodyear right there. I said, thank you. No, anyway, so it all worked out, but he could not think. He could not process in the moment, because that's characteristic of a crisis, right? In fact, what happens in a crisis is, for people who lean into depression, especially, you start to catastrophize. And this thing called cognitive rigidity happens, black and white thinking, when your choices get limited to just, if I don't pass this test, my life is ruined, right? And you start catastrophizing and you start really not being able to think clearly at all. So the more tools we can give our kids about how to manage that kind of a state, right? So that they can be freed up to get out of that black and white cognitive rigidity state and be able to start thinking and processing more creatively is very empowering for them. Rather than you jumping in and just saying, it's going to be okay, this is what you need to do. Let me do this thing for you, or let me tell you what you need to do, right? Some things that can contribute to a crisis, things like sleep deprivation, history of trauma, a lot of family conflict, lots of different things. So there are, a couple of things people are experiencing, in addition to anxiety, a sense of isolation, a feeling like no one's going to understand. Typically, as we said, a lot of anxiety. And so again, since somebody in this state of mind is not going to be able to problem solve, we don't do that right away, right? We don't even try. We spend time processing feelings. And a couple of things I want to tell you about that are really important in terms of how a person handles crises as they go through their life. And can we agree that people are going to have crises in their life, right? We would like to be able to live a charmed life and never have to have any adversity. But that's, as we said earlier, it's a roller coaster ride, my friends. So, and in fact, some people would say that it's necessary to go through difficult times, because that's what really teaches you what your coping skills are, what your strengths are, right? That's how you learn what you're capable of, is going through tough times. If we can reframe it and think about that, then maybe we don't see the tough time as this horrible burden. We see it maybe as an opportunity or a challenge that can be invigorating and motivating rather than defeating and destructive. And so there are three things that help people kind of get through crisis or determine how people get through crisis. One is previous problem-solving experience. So that makes sense, right? The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So parents, it's okay to let your kids struggle a bit and help them get through it. Help them find the way, right? It's okay for you to struggle. It's not fun. I'm not saying, it's fun, but it's a way to kind of figure things out. And so if you've had situations in your life that were challenging and you were able to get through it okay, let's say a loss or a breakup of a relationship or a difficulty at work or a medical situation or whatever, right? And you figured it out. You figured out what helps you get through those situations. You carry that with you into the next situation. That's how you learn your coping skills. That's how our kids learn their coping skills. So versus if you've had difficult situations in your life and you've been met with failure, right? So think of the kid who fails every math test. Very, very, very discouraging, right? No doubt. They have that experience time and time again. How are they going to feel when they have to take their next math test? They might even give up, right? They might not even try to study. That's what we call learned helplessness. Now, that's a troubling phenomenon, and we see it a lot, on people who are reaching out for help. But remember, we humans are resilient. So even somebody who's had a lot of negative experiences, a lot of failure, a lot of rejection, a lot of disappointment, they're still in a position where they can learn something now that they can take with them moving forward. So there's never a point, and at least in my view, where we give up, right? There's always this hope. We lean into hope. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the way you view things, right? The way you view the problem. Is it a problem, insurmountable, or is it a challenge or an opportunity? Now, this might have to do with temperament or personality traits. Some of us are born very optimistic. Some of us have a very optimistic nature. You see the glass half full. So you don't have to work that hard, right? You're a naturally hopeful person. You wake up in the morning and you're like, this is a great day. I can't wait to get started with this day. A lot of us, though, have to work at it a little more, right? If we're a glass half empty person, and I'm oversimplifying it, right? We might have to work a little harder. So there are things you can do. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy teaches us. We can reframe things. So like I wake up in the morning and I drive into work and I say to myself, I can either say to myself, oh my God, I'm never going to get through this day. There's so much I have to do. I might as well just go back to bed, right? Or I can say to myself, I have the opportunity to do some really cool things today. And, there's lunch. There's always lunch, right? So you can reframe it. And so the way you view things, do you view them, our own perceptions, very important. And helping our kids understand how they view the world and what they lean into and what their perceptions are is going to be incredibly empowering for them because they get to understand who they are and what they need to do to be able to feel good and feel like they can meet life's challenges. So the way you view things, and we do have some control over that. And then the third thing is the amount of support you have in your life, right? Super important. Do you have people in your corner rooting you on? Do you have people who are supportive that you can go to and talk to about your personal painful stuff? Do you have people in your corner rooting you on? Or do you have people that you don't feel safe with? People that you feel are knocking you down? That's something to pay attention to. And so we're going to get into like what we can do about it, right? And this, and so one of the things about crisis or stress is that it can be incredibly dangerous, because if you are in a crisis state and you don't get the help and the support you need, and it doesn't get resolved, it can lead you down a road where you can choose really self-destructive or damaging ways of coping. But the opportunity is, if you're in a crisis state or feeling a lot of stress, going through a hard time, this is a time, because your other coping skills might not be working or you can't access them. That's another thing that's a hallmark of a crisis state. Now there's an opportunity to learn new coping skills. Now there's an opportunity to grow, right? So that's why we characterize a crisis state as a time of either danger or opportunity, because we don't want people to resort to negative and harmful coping. We want to use this as an opportunity to kind of, let's see if we can explore positive ways of coping. Are there things that we can do, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Here's some statistics about the prevalence of mental health issues in youth. This needs to be updated since COVID. I think it's the recent data on COVID. One in four children report feeling anxious or depressed. That's a very high number. That's anecdotal, but this was from a couple of years ago, just pre-COVID. From Youth Mental Health First Aid, 4.4 million diagnosed anxiety, 1.9 million depression. 1 in 5 teenagers will experience at least one severe mental health disorder at least one time in their lifetime. That's 20%. 13% of kids aged 5 to 15 years will have a severe mental health issue. So big numbers. We're talking big numbers. And we as parents need to be alert to these things. We want to be able to talk openly and honestly about these concerns. And one way to do that is to be alert for the warning signs, alert for the invitations. The way we like to conceive of this is in this matrix. An invitation or a warning sign could be anything that your child says verbally or does, behavioral, right? And it could be very direct or very indirect. So, some examples there. They could directly tell you, I feel terrible. I feel really sad all the time, right? Or they withdraw. That's a behavioral. So if you think about it, it's just being alert to anything that you hear or see that would be out of the ordinary. Right? Out of the ordinary, a change in behavior particularly. That's why parents are so tuned into their kids. You detect any. And I know a lot of times the question comes up, well, how do I know if this is just like ordinary teenage angst or if this is a really serious thing? You don't know unless you ask. Unless you engage in conversation about it, you don't know. So you want to ask directly. And then be prepared to listen and collaborate, right? This is the sort of thing where you have an opportunity to listen and collaborate with your kid. And we're going to talk more about what that means. Some tips, some general tips about how to talk to kids about their mental health. So the first one here is we want to model positive sharing about our emotions and our challenges. So what does that mean? That means that we want to be able to talk about our own emotional life with our kids. I know you said you have a young child who is still learning a feeling vocabulary. So you're at a great point with him, right? Where you can help give him language. to describe his feelings. We need Brene Brown, who's one of my heroes. She's a famous social worker. You don't usually hear famous and social worker in the same, but she's like a rock star social worker. But in her most recent book called Atlas of the Heart, she talks about how important it is to have a really good feeling vocabulary, because if you can't kind of name and understand your feelings, then you can't express them, and then you can't get the help you need and the support you need from other people. So being able to model that, and talk to your kids about that is really, I think, good. And being able to use iMessages. So, Johnny, when you sit there and you don't answer me when I ask you a question, it makes me feel really disrespected and also worried, as an example. That would be an example of an iMessage. So rather than yelling at Johnny and saying, Johnny, how could you sit there and not answer me? You give an iMessage. When you do this behavior, it makes me feel these things. And then you could follow that up with, I'm wondering what's going on. I'm wondering how we can get through this. What's going on? So being able to model that, being able to pause it, share about, what's going on with you? What are some challenges, and how do you cope with them? How do you cope with them, right? It's not about using your child as a sounding board for your mental health issues. It's about discussing openly and talking about how you deal, how you cope. Another tip here is to disclose your own mental health issues appropriately. So if you are struggling with a mental health issue, to be able to say that you are, and that this is what is helpful to you. So I have a therapist, you might say, or I take this medication because it helps with some of my symptoms of depression or anxiety. So in other words, this shouldn't be like a terrible secret that you don't share. You want to model, in this house, we talk about mental health issues, and I'm going to model this, right? It's a sign of self-respect, really, to be able to acknowledge that you have an issue and get help for it. And so you want to be communicating that to your kids. This is a safe place. And in fact, I have some struggles, and this is how I deal with them. I always used to say when my kids were little and we would find a new coping skill, because I was all about that, and they would share, so I did this thing today, I don't know, I drew a picture, it made me feel good. Okay, that's another thing for your toolbox. Let's put it, I was like such a corny parent when they were that, but it's kind of sweet. I hope they remember it fondly. I have no idea. Another tip, ask questions even when nothing is wrong. I would say ask open-ended questions. Don't ask yes/no questions. Don't be like, do you like ice cream? And if anybody says no to that question, I'm very suspicious. But, what is it that you love most about ice cream? Or, ask an open-ended question. What was the best thing that happened to you today? Rather than what'd you do at school? Nothing. Right? So ask questions. Be curious. That, sometimes people conceive of curiosity as intuition. If your intuition is making you curious about something, ask about it respectfully and in an open-ended way that invites open communication. Neutralize your voice tone. Calm, gentle voice tone, right? We're not hysterical. We're not shouting. I say that because, that was the model I grew up with. Those were my parents. They were either shouting or hysterical. So I try to, crisis counseling, we're calm, calm, warm, not detached, warm, balancing. Don't over dramatize. Oh, you poor dear. What happened today? How could that have happened to you, you poor dear? Right? We're neutralizing our tone. If it helps, offer a bit about your day first, set that as a norm. Leave space for that. When you're going to have discussions, there really should not be in front of screens. So that's a tough one. I know you're going to have a whole workshop on that. We got to model that. How addictive are these things, right? Let's just admit it. How addictive are these things, right? Every spare moment, all your downtime, how much are you scrolling? I think you should do a laboratory experiment in your household and try to chart it and see what you come up with. You can use emojis with little kids. If they won't talk to you, enlist the help of someone else. That's pretty important. Sometimes your kids won't talk to you. But maybe they're really close, like JP called me yesterday. It's hard because we have a lot of investment in our kids, and sometimes it's hurtful if they don't want to talk to us, right? But it's okay, let it go. If there's someone else in the family, or if they really like talking to you at school, or you know what I mean? If there's, the more support, the better, right? Let's talk for a minute about power struggles. Those are fun, right? Has anybody ever had a power struggle with their kid? Okay, good. You know, I'm not going to say it. You know what I'm thinking? Wait, right? That you've got. Yeah. But most of the time we think of power struggles with teenagers, but not always, right? Little kids too. They can be fun. But so it's defined as a control battle. A control battle. It's a situation where, let's talk about teens right now, that your teen has a chronic behavior that you are trying to get them to change, and they are resisting. And the more you try, the more they resist. And the more they resist, the more you try. And the cycle continues. Right? And this pattern is not about the thing that you were focused on originally. It becomes about the child avoiding and resisting the parents pushing. It's almost like the whole dynamic takes on a life of its own. When you as a parent start to consider it your responsibility to change your teenager's behavior, if you think about it, that makes the behavior then your responsibility. And the teenager is then off the hook for their behavior being their responsibility. So you have to do something to change that dynamic. You need to be able as a parent to give your teens the message that they are in charge of their behavior. We are in charge of the parenting, right? But they are in charge of those realms of their development that belong to them. And that can be tricky. But you have to know that the more you force, the more, this is a basic premise of, I think, physics, right? Force meets resistance. I have no idea, but force meets resistance, right? We don't want to take away their power by imposing a lot of shoulds or forcing things. It's going to meet with resistance. What we want to try to do is change the dynamic to create an environment where collaborative problem solving can occur. And so let's talk a little bit about communication skills, because this is what it all comes really down to. And you know, good active listening skills, and we call this active listening, opens up communication. That's the whole purpose of it. It opens up communication. These things, these roadblocks, shut communication. These are things that shut communication down. And we all do them, especially parents. We all do them in the most well-meaning ways. So there's no judgment here. We all do these things. We all do these things. You know, we tell kids what to do. We say, you must just suck it up. There's a very funny stand-up comedy special on HBO right now by Gary Goldman called The Great Depression. And he talks about when he grew up that there were only two things that were treatments for depression. One was just suck it up. And the other one I think he said was, you know, you'll get over it, you know, meaning that back in the day, as we were talking about earlier, you know, we didn't have the language for this. We didn't really understand what we understand now, that these things are not helpful, right? You know, they don't just go away. right? Don't be such a drama queen. You're making too much of this. Everything's going to be okay, right? These are things we say, but what they end up doing is they end up really, if your kid is really struggling with something and they really want to talk about it, they need to feel safe to do so. And these are things that will not make them feel safe. These are things that are gonna, when I was young, the same thing happened to me. Doesn't sound terrible, but what it ends up doing is taking the focus off the kid and back on you. We love to do that as parents. My husband does that a lot. Forgive me, he's a great dad, but that's one thing he does a lot, so, but he's learned through osmosis by me giving him the look, like he does that. Or lecturing, it's my job. I have to tell them, how dangerous the world is, right? So what do we want to do instead? We want to do active listening. And at Response, we call, listening to the music behind the words. Really being able to, it's tough work, listening really well. And remember I said earlier, when someone's in a crisis or a heightened emotional state, you need to spend time with feelings. And the best way to do that is through reflections, which is one of the skills here. So a reflection of feelings is, like listening to the music behind the words, right? The feeling content of the communication. So now, I hate to say this, but a kid might call us and say, my parents are always yelling at me. I'm just sick of it. Right? Because often it's us, parents. We get blamed for everything. And we might say, it sounds like you're just feeling so frustrated and angry with your parents. And what does that do? It opens the door. It opens the door for greater and deeper understanding, because we're giving them back their feelings. We're giving in the words that we're using. We're not giving an opinion or a judgment. We're simply repeating back what we hear them saying. And that simple act is an act of acceptance and respect. And it helps to create a trusting bond. And so I want to challenge you in the next week, although I won't be here to follow up on your homework, but in the next week, if your child, teenager, young adult comes to you and they're in an emotionally charged state and they, express some feelings, rather than, trying to make it better, trying to fix it, which we all love to do, I'm going to challenge you to try to offer a reflection or a validation of the feeling. See what that does. They might look at you and say, what have you done with my mother? Have you abducted my mother? Or it might bring the temperature down in the room. It might calm you down too, because then you don't feel this terrible pressure to try to fix it. It becomes a more collaborative conversation. We also do a lot of restatements. So in the example above, my parents are always yelling at me, I'm sick of it. A restatement would be something like, sounds like you and your parents are not getting along, that there's a lot of conflict in the house. I'm wondering, can you tell me more about that? Again, opening the door. And what's the goal? You want to really understand things from their perspective. Right? You want to really understand things from their perspective. Again, with the goal of lowering that anxiety before you can get to collaborative problem solving. And, I like to reference the sources of strength wheel. Have you had sources of strength in the district? That's something we can talk about another time. It's a great program, mostly for teenagers in middle schools and high schools, but we all need sources of strength, right? If you think about what's going to get us through tough times, we need to think about our sources of strength, right? In order to cope with life's challenges, we need to be able to figure out what are our sources of strength, and we need to help our kids figure that out. These things on the wheel are the things that research tells us most often come up that people cite as their sources of strength. Some of them are pretty obvious, right? Having good family support, right? Makes sense. Having good medical access, having mental health access, right? Positive friends. You know, we know how painful it can be when our kids experience friends who are not positive, who are the opposite of positive, right? It can be really, really difficult for your kids to navigate, but having positive friends, that's huge, right? But things like, you know, and healthy activities, that makes sense. The more the better. We're going to have an opportunity to look at that. Mentors. And that's where that idea that if it's not you that your kid's going to talk to, do they have a mentor, right? Somebody they look up to and admire that they can go to. Things like spirituality and generosity. So generosity is an interesting one. Generosity, or having a generous spirit, comes from gratitude. So helping your kids develop a gratitude practice. I have a gratitude practice, meaning I'm intentional about reminding myself every day of the things I feel grateful for. That's a very simple thing you could do with your kids, especially I'm looking at you because your child's so young, so you have a great opportunity to start now, because the positive psychologists tell us that if you develop a gratitude practice, you remind yourself of 3 things every day that you feel grateful for, that's going to have a positive effect on your overall mental health. And it could be really simple things, right? You know, people do vision boards about it. That could be a creative activity you can do with your kid. Lots of different things you can do. But having a generous spirit also speaks to wanting to help your community. You know, getting involved in your community, being connected with things going on in your community, right? People need an opportunity to give back and be involved. So generosity is great. Spirituality is great too. I'm not a very religious person, but I think about spirituality as things that inspire me, things that make me feel connected to something bigger, things like being out in nature, watching a sunrise, you know, but for some people, their faith is a very strong source of strength. This is a great website. It's called yourlifeyourvoice.org. Go check it out. Please go check it out. Actually, I'm going to give you a handout from that website. This is from their page on coping skills. It's actually 99 coping skills, as you can see. Just a great, great, great site to go check out with your. It was made for teens, and I really recommend you checking it out. Yourlifeyourvoice.org. But there's a lot of great stuff on here. We're going to talk about this. Here's some more resources. They're all online resources, and they're all fantastic. I'm skipping that. So I wanted to share with you a couple of resources, and we still have a few more minutes, so we have time. This comes from Your Life, Your Voice too. Oh, you're my distributor. This is the safety plan from the Your Life, Your Voice website, and I'd like you to take a look at it. This could be, sure. Keep them.
Thank you.
Yeah, you might like it to have it in your office because I find that it's a great collaborative activity that you can do with your kids. I think we all should have a safety plan. It's based on a very evidence-based tool that was created in our field by Dr. Barbara Stanley. But I really like the look of this, and you know, it's created. It's a worksheet, so you could do it with your kids. But it asks you to think about, you know, what are some warning signs that cause you to feel stress? You know, what are things in your life that make you feel stressed? Good to be aware of that. What's going on inside your body and your mind when that happens? What are some coping skills or distraction techniques that you can do without the help of anyone else that can help you get your mind off your problems? What are some social settings and people that you feel, you know, can help you? Supportive people in your life, professionals, and safe environment. What are things that you need in your environment to help you feel safe and well? What are things you need to remove from your environment? For example, maybe you don't need to have this thing right by your head when you go to sleep at night. And then the last thing, reasons for living. What are the things that motivate you to keep going? What do you care about most? We're going to be doing a project this summer with Theater 3. It's a one-man play. It's called Every Brilliant Thing. And I hope you guys come. I'll let the district know about it. But it's a play about a man who creates this list when he's a child because his mother is suicidal. And on the list is every brilliant thing about life. And so when he's 9 years old, it has things like ice cream or staying up late or wearing a cape. But as he gets older, throughout the various stages of his life, the list gets longer and longer and more elaborate and complicated, and it becomes just this wonderful tool in his life to remind him. And it reminds me of a gratitude practice, right? What are the things that really make life wonderful for you? Now let's turn it on ourselves in our last few minutes. Let's talk about us, right? Because we need to walk the walk. We can't just talk the talk. Right? We gotta take care of ourselves. You know, the whole oxygen mask thing. It's really true. You know, you need to take care of yourselves. Right? We can't just fix others. We gotta help ourselves. I like that cartoon. But it really is a core component of best practice. It's very important that we think about our own self-care. So I have for you, my distributor, I have a self-care assessment tool for you all to take a look at. And you can do this, you know, maybe this weekend when you have time. But take a look at it when you get a chance. It basically gives you an opportunity to think about, you know, we talked about what are your sources of strength, right? To take a look at what are you doing to take care of yourself. Maybe there are some things you're doing and you feel like you're doing a really good job, right? Maybe you eat well and you exercise regularly. Good for you. But maybe there are other things you could be doing, right? Like, or I'll use myself as an example. I do exercise every day and I do eat well, but I have terrible sleep. Terrible. I should have gone to a sleep study years ago. So I should go do that. Shouldn't I go do that? Like, why should I live with insomnia? It's not right. So that's like on my list of something I know that I need to do. I really like taking a look at this, I like the idea of a self-assessment because you know yourself best. And you know, you'd be surprised. Maybe there's something that you've always wanted to do. You know, I was at a conference a couple of years ago in Chicago, and it was a conference about suicide. You can imagine what my mental state was after 8 hours listening to people talk about suicide. So I took a walk over to the Art Institute of Chicago, and I went to look at a Van Gogh exhibit. And can I tell you that the synapses in my brain, I could feel them shift. It was so wonderful to look at this beautiful artwork after being inside all day listening to lectures about suicide. So that was something I could add to my toolbox now. You know, I can look at beautiful art. That's a thing I can do. So what I want to do as a way to sort of reinforce everything we've learned tonight is I want to do that was it. You're such a good assistant. I want to do some activities with you. We have, you know, we still have 5 minutes left. So let's not even look at the slides anymore. So there's an idea that we know a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder. There's been a lot of research. There's a lot less research on this idea of post-traumatic growth. But there's more and more lately. And there are basically, so the idea of post-traumatic growth is that a traumatic event happens or a crisis happens, and it can really unlock your ability to lead a happier life because you're going to learn things about yourself that you didn't know before. And there are 4 kinds of strengths and resilience that we can develop that can lead to post-traumatic growth. And they're scientifically validated. And I want to do them with you tonight because I want you to leave here with tools that you can use. So the first one has to do with physical resilience. So physical resilience means that your body can withstand more physical stress and heal itself faster when you take care of it, when you do physical activity. every single second that you are not sitting still, you are actively improving your health. So you can do one of two things. You can either raise your fists up over your head as high as you can for 5 seconds, or I'm going to give you a choice of two things. Right? You can either do that, or you can stomp your feet. Or if you're a high achiever, you can do both. So seriously, you have to do it now. So either stretch way up, right? Take a deep breath. Okay, you're doing this. All right, I'm going to do both for 5 seconds, right? Good job. Okay. So really the rule of thumb is that you shouldn't sit still for more than an hour ever in a day. So some people have alarms on their phone to prompt them to just get up and walk. There's that annoying technology that we have. So the second thing, so that's physical resilience. The second type of resilience is mental resilience. Right? All of us that are doing Wordle every day or the mini crossword, that's good for your mental resilience, because when you have good mental resilience, you have more focus, more discipline, more determination, more willpower, and it's like a muscle that you have to work. We know this from the scientific research that willpower acts like a muscle. It gets stronger the more you exercise it. So what you want to do is you want to tackle a tiny challenge without giving up every day. So let's do one right now. Either snap your fingers exactly 50 times or count backwards from 100 by 7. Go. One or the other. One or the other. All right. So I'm not good at snapping, and I stopped counting. So tell me when you're good. I feel like I should be reading some poetry because Are you seriously counting? Yeah. Oh, good job. Good job. Okay, so tackling a tiny challenge without giving up, however absurd, like the one that I just made you do, is actually scientifically validated. It's a good way to boost your willpower, so good job. The third one is emotional resilience. Now, you have the ability to provoke powerful positive emotions like curiosity or love when you need them. You have that ability. And here's a secret from the scientific literature. If you can manage to experience 3 positive emotions for every 1 negative emotion over the course of an hour or a day or a week, you dramatically improve your health. This is called the 3-to-1 positive emotion ratio. So here's what you're going to do. Either look out the window, it's all you have to do to evoke curiosity, or search baby animals on your phone. And what happens when you find a picture of a baby animal, what are you going to do? You're going to, it's going to make you feel love. Fourth one, social resilience. We get more strength from friends, family, neighbors, community. It's a great way to build social resilience and gratitude. Gratitude is even better. We used to shake hands a lot before COVID. If you shake hands with someone for 6 seconds, it increases the oxytocin in your brain, and it increases which is called the trust hormone. Some people, you're primed to like the other person. Yeah. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and I have no way of checking on you if you do this or not, but one way you can bolster your social resilience is to send a thank you. Just text someone in your life and say, "Hey, I was thinking of you. Thank you." Or just, "Hey, I was thinking of you." Makes you feel better. Makes you feel better, right? Let's say it's even somebody like your bossy big sister, like I have, who hasn't called you in 3 days, and you're like annoyed. So instead of carrying that resentment and annoyance, I'm just going to text you, "Hey, I was thinking of you." Makes me feel immediately better. I let go of all that resentment. So if you regularly boost these 4 types of resilience, physical, mental, emotional, and social, you will live longer. And you will be happier, and you will have less stress. So doing the 3-to-1 positive emotion ratio practice, not sitting still for more than 1 hour at a time, reaching out to one person you care about every day, and tackling small challenges to boost your willpower, that's the way to do it. And if we do those things every day and our kids see us do those things and invest in our mental health, they will be inspired. They will be inspired to do the same. So thanks so much for having me tonight. I think I got right to
You're
our
right on the
time.
nose.
So,
Thank you so much.
I mean, this isn't for the world out there, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take a couple. Anybody have any questions?
Could I ask that, will we be able to show this presentation? Will you give us a link to this presentation or
I
access
can give
to
you
the
a link to the
slides?
PowerPoint.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
All I
Thank you.
ask is that, our organization is prominent,
Yeah, we won't alter it at all. We'll just put a link right to the slides itself.
Sure,
that-
sure.
So they'd have access to that.
All right.
I'm gonna jump
Tell
in.
Erin to remind me. and
I
I'll
will.
send
Thank you
her.
so much.
All right.
Sit
Good to
1,
meet you.
2, 3.
5, 6, that's right. You were listening.
I'm always listening. So I want to thank you again so much, Mel, for coming out and joining us tonight, our folks that came in with us. And next month, we're going to do a forum similarly on school security, what parents need to know. That's April 26th. And on May 18th, we're going to be talk about being aware, balancing social media as a parent. Again, very important as well. So thank you again for coming tonight, and we'll see you soon.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you. Thank
Thank
you.
you guys for coming out. It was fun. I hope you had some fun.
Yes, very engaging.